And I'll call the member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's my great pleasure and honour to rise and speak in this matter of public importance proposed by the member for Wakefield, because the member for Wakefield really over a number of years now has given extraordinary voice to the shock, the dislocation, the distress, but also to the dignity of the community of Northern Adelaide, particularly his community around Elizabeth, that are going to be so enormously impacted by the closure of the Holden's factory tomorrow. But also for all of those supply companies that have grown up and operated for so many decades in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, but also in the western suburbs of Adelaide that I represent, and the southern suburbs that are represented by the member for Kingston, and the northeastern suburbs represented by the member for Macon. This really has been the outstanding icon of the South Australian economy, Holden's, the outstanding icon of the South Australian economy stretching back many, many, many decades. And I want to be able to pay tribute to that icon, but most importantly to the thousands and thousands of South Australians who over the decades have worked for Holden's and have worked for the supply companies that have supplied Holden's and the other car manufacturing companies like Chrysler and Mitsubishi that over the decades have operated in South Australia. Holden's, as many people don't know, is actually a 160-year-old company. It has been operating in South Australia since the middle part of the 19th century. It started as a saddlery business, but took the decision in the early 20th century to shift into automotive manufacturing. It didn't until 1948, as the member for Wakefield has pointed out, build its own iconic Australian car, but for decades it had the contract to build and assemble essentially cars from the American manufacturers, particularly General Motors. It built a factory in Woodville, where I live, my suburb, in the western suburbs of Adelaide in 1924 that operated until the 1980s, building GM cars and then building the Holden. We had one of the 1952 Holdens down at Old Parliament House this morning that was built at the Woodville plant. And a cluster of supply companies built up at the same time and have continued operating the decades since in the western suburbs, some of them around the corner from my house, one still on the Woodville site, just behind the Bunnings factory, AI Automotive, and many others as well. They also built a plant in Birkenhead before the war, Birkenhead in Port Adelaide, again in my electorate, employing many thousands of members of the western suburbs community. In the 1930s, Holden's had signed a contract to shift their entire South Australian operation to Fisherman's Bend, which would have been devastating to South Australia that was trying to industrialise at the time. They were convinced to keep their operations in South Australia, and really the rest has been history for 8 decades. For 8 decades this has been, along perhaps with the steel furnace, the blast furnace at Whyalla, one of the 2 twin pillars of the South Australian post-war economy, around which so much research and development has grown, so much skills development, but most importantly, so many families' lives have been built around the opportunity to work at the Holden's plant, at Woodville, at Birkenhead, and then since the 50s out at Elizabeth in the member for Wakefield's electorate. And it just has been an extraordinary part not only of our economy but of our culture. We always supported the Holden's car against the Ford car at Mount Panorama. It was always such a big part of our pride. And tomorrow all of that ends. Tomorrow will be a tragedy for the community in South Australia, particularly in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, but also in other parts of Adelaide where those supply companies are such an important part of the manufacturing economy. The University of Adelaide says that it will cost 24,000 jobs in South Australia, the closure of the automotive industry. 24,000 jobs in a small state like South Australia will have a devastating impact on humans, not just on the economy but on families. And school principals in my electorate have for a couple of years now been talking about the distress that their children are evincing because they're so worried about what mum and dad are going to do after this closure. This was an avoidable decision. As my colleagues have said, this was an act of massive economic self-harm by this government, for which the current Prime Minister also owns part responsibility as a member of the Cabinet at the time. But I want to pay tribute at this time to the work, particularly of the Holden's workforce now, putting out the highest quality cars, I'm told by the member for Wakefield, of any factory that GM runs across the planet. This has been an extraordinary part of South Australia's history. I wish it were part of their future.
Time